Ahoy everyone! Got quite a few requests for a little more detail on the sculling oar that I use on this boat as a follow-up to some of the videos I've done on engineless sailing. So I'm up here on the foredeck sitting right next to my sculling oar, and presently I have it stowed, and you can see here the way I have it stowed is I have one end where the grip is lashed to the end of the whisker stay, on the end of the bowsprit, and then I have the other end here lashed to a lifeline stanchion. This is actually my fourth oar, and I've found there's a couple of if you're gonna stow it this way, there's a couple of details you need to pay attention to, because I lost the previous 3 oars overboard at sea because they work loose, and we'll talk about that in a minute. For this 31-foot boat that weighs about 8 tons, this oar is 14 feet in length. The blade is about 6 inches wide, and I built it myself by laminating 3 1-inch thick boards of Douglas fir. So I laminated it together and then cut out the oar. At some point on my website I'm going to have a description on how to build an oar. I'm sure you could also Google on how to build an oar. It's actually not as complicated as you might think it is. So the way I stow my sculling oar at sea is I have the grip end out here at the end of the bowsprit, and as you can see I just have it lashed to the whisker stay, and I have 2 ropes. One is just a loop of line with a reef knot, and I'll let it just hang on that loop of line so I can easily slide the oar in and out of its stowage space. But then whenever I go sailing, I use the Oriental Lanyard, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I use that and lash that onto the whisker stay here. And the Oriental Lanyard actually passes through the oar, so it's attached to the grip end of the oar. Now the blade end of the oar I have lashed to the first lifeline stanchion. And the only detail here I want to point out is, you notice I have a couple of holes drilled in the blade, and I pass the lashing line through these holes. This sculling oar is actually my 4th oar, and I lost 3 of them overboard at sea because the oar managed to work its way out of the lashings. And ever since I drilled these holes and passed the lashing lines through them, I've not had that problem. I've had this oar for I think about 8 years now, and it's never come loose at sea. Now the sculling oar lock is obviously aft, and since this is a double ender, as you can see, there's just a cross piece of timber there, and then a bronze oar lock is mounted on the end. This came with the boat, so don't ask me for the make and serial number of that oar lock. I have no idea where the previous owner found it. In the case that you can't find a bronze oar lock suitable for the sculling oar for your boat, what you can always do is simply make a sculling oar notch out of wood, just like the notch I have here on my dinghy, and it's just a U-shaped cutout in the wood. And what I would do here is take a little bit of fiberglass roving and some epoxy and put maybe a couple laminates on the inside of the notch there, and make that nice and smooth, so you'll have very little friction. And then you can just drop the oar right into the notch and use it for sculling. And then forward of the oar lock, as you can see just beneath the cockpit bench there, if we go down, there's a small cleat, and that's what I'll use to secure the Oriental Lanyard, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But what the Oriental Lanyard does is it counteracts the upward pressure of the oar you always get when you're sculling. Okay, so now we have our sculling oar, aft and ready to be deployed, to be used here. So what we'll do is we'll just slide it down through the lock, and before I get it into place so that the lock is against the leathers, I will tie on the Oriental Lanyard. And just be careful when you're doing this that the oar doesn't slide overboard on you before you have the lanyard tied on. I've done that one before. So you can see when you start sculling, there's a fair bit of upward pressure on this oar. And so what the Oriental Lanyard does here is it takes that pressure away. So then the only force I really have to exert is pulling the oar back and forth, and of course changing the pitch of the blade on each stroke there. So I hope you found that informative. Sculling oars are not complicated. They're just non-standard equipment, so it's not something you're going to be able to buy off the shelf of any major chandlery these days, and you're probably going to end up building out the whole thing yourself. But as I've said in previous videos, a sculling oar is a very useful tool for maneuvering in close quarters, so long as there's not too much wind. Something just to get you that last 10 meters or so up to the mooring after an afternoon sail and the winds have died away to nothing. And sculling oars are not expensive. You can build a 14-foot oar like this. You could build the whole thing for less than $100, and you could probably build out your whole setup for less than $200, which is certainly a lot less than a diesel engine will cost you.